World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. The Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Glad to welcome as well Rachel Donadio, Paris correspondent for The Atlantic. Nice to see you.
Thanks. Nice to see you too.
Armin Arefi, staff writer at the international desk of French news weekly magazine Le Point. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And Georg Blume, Paris correspondent for the German news weekly Die Zeit. How are you, sir?
Fine, thank you.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. Okay, so if you're a Korean who's rooting for peace, we got good news and bad news. The good news, Donald Trump has publicly rebuked his new national security advisor, whose remarks on a Sunday talk show had Pyongyang talking of canceling that historic June 12th summit in Singapore with the U.S. president. John Bolton, who'd offered a Libya solution, he said, for North Korea. Libya, where just a few short years after agreeing to do his nuclear disarmament, Muammar Gaddafi came to a grisly end. Now, the bad news, it's not clear Kim Jong-un will prefer Trump's take on the situation.
We never said to Gaddafi, oh, we're going to give you protection, we're going to give you military strength, we're going to give you all of these things. We went in and decimated him. The model, if you look at that model with Gaddafi, that was a total decimation. We went in there to beat him. Now, that model would take place if we don't make a deal, most likely. But if we make a deal, I think Kim Jong-un is going to be very, very happy.
Was that a reassurance or a threat, Christopher Dickey?
Well, it was a threat, but also a reassurance. I mean, he went on to say, basically, Kim and North Korea are going to get rich, that the model is more South Korea, that all kinds of good things are going to happen. Really, actually, what I think Trump was doing was exposing the entire negotiating position of the United States, which is we are going to guarantee the rule of the Kim dynasty in perpetuity, probably with some kind of treaty arrangement, in exchange for Kim giving up his nuclear weapons. And that is something that Kim has been looking for a long time. I was reading up on the meetings that he'd had with other American figures over the years, and this was always a repeated thing. North Korea is under threat by the United States. If we can eliminate the threat, then we can come to some kind of understanding. Trump, who doesn't give a damn about human rights, is saying basically rule the country any way you want, but don't have nuclear weapons, and we'll live with it and we'll make you rich.
But that Libya model, and I'm quoting him, Georg Blum, would take place if we don't make a deal, most likely. How will Kim respond to that, you think?
He would be very happy to know that Trump will make him happy. You know, that was the key message there, I think, that America is again promising something to Asia, a new growth for North Korea, and it was astonishing that Trump went so far. And I think the reason is that Kim has negotiated during the last weeks and months with China. China has come very far to the front to support Kim, and China has at the same time engaged in a trade war with the United States. So if America is not, you know, headed with something to offer towards that summit, Kim can rely on China as he has always had.
Well,
and that is, and it's very important that the United States is noticing that China threat, which is now on the negotiations.
Part of the subtext for all this in Washington is that somehow this grand deal, this grand bargain with Kim and North Korea will pull North Korea away from China. This seems to me wildly implausible, but it's the kind of thing that people in Washington seem to think is credible, and it's one of the things that they're talking about. They're also talking about it in Seoul. We have a piece about this on the Daily Beast today.
Armin Arefi, there might be a deal. Trump's strategy may work.
I really don't think so. And if we focus on what happened with the Iran deal, then it gave a strong message to North Korea, which is you never get rid of your bomb, because then we will invade you. That's I think that's the thing. That's the point. If Gaddafi had kept his massive destruction weapon, he would have never been invaded. if Iran had already the bomb, which they have not until now, they would have been secured because there wouldn't be any regime change threats from Donald Trump. So I think that the United States, by leaving the Iran deal, have sent a strong message to and actually encouraged North Korea to keep and never dismantle their nuclear arsenal.
Well, and Bolton's remarks about Libya and Iraq, that's exactly what made Kim crazy. And what the North Koreans said in their statement is, we're not Iraq, we're not Libya. They didn't have any nuclear weapons. We do. That's a big difference.
All right, so Trump showing his cards, you say.
Absolutely.
But is it Bolton who made the clumsier of the two remarks?
Well, Bolton was incredibly stupid to make those remarks, and I'm sure that he was hauled on the carpet. I don't think Trump likes to get out there and have to dial back what his national security advisor has been saying, with his national security advisor standing right behind him. It looks like a stupid appointment, and Trump doesn't like to look stupid.
Trump, the deal maker, also promised a Middle East peace deal, but when he sent his special envoy, son-in-law Jared Kushner, this past Monday to Jerusalem, it was for the official move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv, a celebration in stark contrast with the 60 Palestinians killed that day in protests at the Gaza border, mostly by live ammunition. Was this the day the two-state solution died, Georg Blumer?
It was a day when in German public television, where we never talked usually badly about Israel, we were talking about Israel doing genocide. And if you employ such a word in German, against Israel, it's almost, unthinkable in a way. And it was a public German television, made of the road people. And it really showed how far, intolerance with Israel has gone when they're when policemen are shooting at demonstrators. I mean, it's a Tiananmen scenario that we lived through, and there can be arguments made, of course, that the demonstrators were infiltrated by Hamas people and so on, but that's not a reason to shoot at demonstrators. And I think. We all, German policy is made one of the key consensus in German policy always has been the support for Israel. It will not change over what has happened, but they're really making it difficult.
Rachel Donadio?
I think also it shows a divide between the American Jewish community and Israel as well. I mean, I think that 10, 20, 30 years ago, I think there would have been more kind of unconditional American Jewish support for Israel. And now there's a generational divide where I think a lot of younger, members of the American Jewish community are saying this is not Israel is acting.
Here's the fascinating bit. What is it? A vast majority of Jews did not vote for Donald Trump in the U.S. In that election.
Right.
Who were those people then who were at this ceremony in Jerusalem?
Well, I mean, a kind of a core right-wing supporters of Trump who for decades have been saying, move the embassy, move the embassy, move the embassy, which is one thing in the kind of self-enclosed rhetorical circles of American Jewish conversation. And it's another thing to move the embassy and have the practical, diplomatic, and many other consequences of that. I mean, it just starts a chain of other events. So it's basically people in Trump's kind of circle, Jared Kushner's, it's a right-wing element.
The oddest part of that, Christopher Dickey, was this invocation by this Dallas-based Baptist preacher. His name is Robert Jeffress, who once said the Jews were going to hell.
Well, anybody who's not an evangelical Christian, including Catholics, are going to hell as far as he's concerned. I mean, his idea is you have to accept the word of God the way I tell you it is, and if you don't, you're screwed. You're going to hell.
Why was this man why did they pick this guy?
Because he was a big political supporter of Trump. In fact, the night that Trump won the election, he gave a private blessing to Trump and his family before they went out. I mean, this is the kind of people that Trump associates with. They're people who believe firmly in their vision of God believe they're like takfiris in Muslim faith. They believe anybody who doesn't believe as they do is going to hell.
Armin Arefi, when you look at the reaction of the Arab world in the days that have followed Monday's bloodbath, we've had, of course, the strong tit-for-tat between Israel and Turkey. We've had strong condemnation in Tehran. Elsewhere, it's been a lot more muted. What does that tell you?
It tells us that there is a shift today between the Sunni Gulf countries that are more oppressed and about the Iranian threat. That's their main subject to be worried. And
because
actually,
the Palestinian cause, it's something that was always held high every time you had an Arab League
for the
summit.
public, yeah. And but the problem today is that we have someone like Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, of Saudi Arabia, that is very close to Jared Kushner, and actually, he has been aware about the deal, and he put so much pressure on Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president, so that he could accept it. And the problem is that Mahmoud Abbas will never accept a deal with Palestine's capital in not Jerusalem, but Abu Dis. Abu Dis, which is a suburb of Jerusalem on the other side of the wall. So it tells us that there is now a new... you have three capitals: Washington, Jerusalem, or Tel Aviv, it depends on if you're Netanyahu or not, and Riyadh. These three countries are allied against Iran, and that's something very important for the future of the region. And it shows that Saudi Arabia these days, they are in a very uncomfortable situation, because on the one hand, the Palestinian issue is still very important for the Arab public opinion. And it's not for the Arab officials.
It's not for the leaders. There's one more player in all this, Egypt, which announced it was opening the Rafah border crossing with Gaza, and doing it for the duration of the holy month of Ramadan, which began on Thursday. It's the leadership of Hamas, which went to Egypt to tone it down. Are you surprised at the way, after what happened at the start of the week, it's now the tension has gone down a notch?
Yes, because from what I know, Egypt accepted to do that, to open the Rafah crossing on the condition that Hamas would somehow handle the demonstrations. And actually today we haven't seen that much demonstrators against close to the fence. But the thing is that Egypt is quite as responsible as Israel for what's happening these days in Gaza, because they've been closing the crossing for about, I think, it started in 2013. And I even know that some Egyptian security officials told the Israelis, we don't care about Gaza because they are all terrorists. That's something I heard from an Egyptian official. So Egypt is part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Chris Verdicki, I want your reaction to something we just heard there from Armin, which is this gap between what the leaders are doing and what public opinion wants.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, I'm not sure that public opinion is as sympathetic to the Palestinians as it once was. There's been a lot of changing dynamics in the Muslim world. But I think that in the case of Egypt particularly, when you have the kind of massacre that you had on the, whatever it was, the 14th, that's the kind of thing that does affect what they call the Arab street, and particularly in Egypt. I think people are very sensitive to that. And as much of a strongman, really as much of a dictator as Sisi has become, he can't ignore that completely. That's one of the reasons I think he wanted to open Rafah. He wanted to be seen to be doing something that was positive, Ramadan, especially for Ramadan. So I think that they can't ignore it completely, but it certainly doesn't have the resonance that it once did. It used to be, whenever there was violence in the territories, whenever there was violence in Gaza, the first intifada, the second intifada, the whole Arab world felt like it was in flames because of that. That just doesn't happen anymore.
Well, the dynamics have changed too. I mean, it was for a while, it's like the Palestinian conflict was kind of second stage compared to the Syrian civil war and the Arab Spring. I mean, so many dynamics have changed.
Compared to the Islamic State, compared to all those things, it was sort of downgraded in the global and also the Arab
But it might come back, I mean, as an issue for global sympathy.
I mean, we have clearly a lack of leadership by the Palestinian Authority right now. I mean, Abbas is not, it's too old. But once they're going to be, the Palestinians will find a new leadership, and it might be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years away, they can come back on the stage very strongly, They are the victims in this situation. Sure. And if you ignore their plight, policy will fail, I'm sure.
And that's a real risk for the future of Israel, actually, because it just reminds us that there is still a problem and it won't end. What we saw in Gaza, but also what is happening every day in the West Bank. Yeah, I've been traveling the West Bank about 3 weeks ago. It was terrible. I was going with a student girl who was actually at the university in Abu Dis, and her house was in eastern Jerusalem. So she had to turn just around the wall, and it took her 2 hours to go back home, whereas her house was just 5 kilometers away. So that's the daily life of Palestinians. And the thing with Mahmoud Abbas is that, yes, he's not quite he's discredited in the Palestinian street. But the problem is that who is coming after? I'm sure that's the leader that will come afterwards will be much more severe towards Israelis than Mahmoud Abbas, because he has abandoned the weapon. And what did he get in return? Nothing.
But that brings us to a critical point, which we've talked about before, which is the Palestinians don't have anything to deal with. They don't have any leverage. They don't have any economic leverage. They don't have any military leverage. They don't have any terrorist leverage. Their only leverage is population. So their philosophy is largely, let's stay here, have babies, hold on here, and eventually we'll have a one-state solution and we'll be the majority. But, before that happens, I would guess that the Israelis, certainly the Netanyahu type Israelis, will force them out.
There's Donald Trump moving that embassy. There's Donald Trump walking away from the Iran deal. This past week has been one where Europe's been grappling with that. We'll be talking about it when we come back. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week, in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. We welcome back as well Rachel Donadio, Paris correspondent for The Atlantic. From French news weekly magazine Le Point, Armin Arefi. And from German weekly news magazine Die Zeit, Georg Blume. We were talking about Trump's decision and how they affect the Middle East. There's, that embassy move to Jerusalem. And then there's Iran. It was the week that EU signatories to the 2015 nuclear deal met with the Iranian foreign minister, part of efforts to salvage the agreement. But already, just 24 hours after that meeting, French energy giant Total warning its participation in the giant South Pars gas project was in jeopardy. Others, like Danish shipping company Maersk, German insurance firm Allianz, spooked by past instances of European companies whacked by Washington with giant fines for trading in U.S. dollars. France's president at a summit in Bulgaria said he will do all he can to keep the nuclear deal alive, but on 2 conditions.
We are not going to start a strategic or commercial war with the United States over Iran. We will not sanction or counter-sanction American businesses. It would not make geopolitical sense. The objective is to have this accord and obtain the American signature. The second limit is that we are not going to impose on French businesses to stay in Iran. The president of the French Republic is not the CEO of Total.
Armin Arefi, is that waving the white flag of surrender to Donald Trump effectively when he says that?
Of course, I think the situation is critical. As we heard from Iran, they have a 2-month deadline. In 2 months, if the Europeans are not able to find solution for their companies, then the Iran deal will be officially dead. And so the thing is that whether the Europeans will be able to get waivers from the United States for this or that company, and the answer is quite obvious. It will be very, very difficult.
Yeah, because the EU is now talking about reviving this plan they had that they started in 1996 when to avoid the US's Cuba sanctions. But already, by the way, my list wasn't exhaustive. There's a German bank, DZ, which is also saying it's going to stop as of July any activity in Iran.
So the US are just getting to what they wanted. Weaken Iran, the Islamic Republic, but also the European companies and Europe at the same time. So the thing is that it will have huge effects, because if the Europeans cannot find any other solution, then it will empower the hardliners in Iran. And they will never, never, never negotiate again any deal. And it's a huge threat for all of us. If the United States, if the resolution voted by the UN, which is what is the Iran deal is not respected, then it just send a message, such as North Korea, that they have to go to get the weapon. And that's what we are hearing from Tehran these days.
What, if anything, can the EU do?
Well, I mean, from a German point of view, it was encouraging how France reacted this week. At least, let's say, rhetorically, they stood up to the
But
Washington
you just heard Emmanuel Macron saying, I don't want to get in a trade war with Donald Trump.
Yes, of course, but Le Maire, his economy minister, said the United States cannot be the economical policeman of the world. We have four propositions for Europe to make not only the blockage, like in the Cuba thing. They had other propositions which they advanced in Brussels, where the Germans were very prudent, creating a new office which deals independently with sanctions at the EU, or putting up the European Investment Bank for making transfers in euro from Iran, so companies can continue to work there when they don't have problems with the US. There were efforts by the French, and who were very prudently taken by the Germans, you know, and others, to really do something. And that's, we shouldn't, you know, even though there's indeed the time is short, we should continue to do that and show that we are working on it.
All right, the president of the European Council opening that summit with a shot across the bow of the United States. Donald Tusk looking to rally the troops over the Iran deal and the looming threat of steel and aluminum tariffs.
With friends like that, who needs enemies? But frankly speaking, Europe should be grateful by President Trump, because thanks to him, we have got rid of all illusions. He has made us realize that if you need a helping hand, you will find one at the end of your arm.
What was your reaction when you heard that, Rachel Donadio?
Well, I mean, it's Europe talking back in a way. But the question is, it's rare to hear that from a European leader so strongly saying, okay, we can't count on the U.S. in that way. But of course, Trump has been saying Europe doesn't pay its bills for NATO as much as it should. And so it's kind of a rhetorical war. But I guess the question now is, what is Europe going to do in practical terms?
And?
I don't know. I mean, can it push back in any way to protect the interests of European countries in Iran? I'm really not sure. I mean, again, it's every time it's like Europe grows through crisis, but okay, how's it going to grow now?
Because we have to know one thing. Even before the American withdrawal, it was very, very, very difficult for example, foreign banks to invest in Iran, to go along with some projects. It was very, very difficult because of the remaining American sanctions, even before the withdrawal. And at that time, it was very difficult for Europe to do anything. So we cannot see practically what Europe can do. We were talking about like trading in euro. It might be a solution, but it's very hard to put in place. Using the European Bank of Investment, that might be a solution. But then the problem is the climate of fear that was just created around Iran. And unfortunately, as the Supreme Leader said in Iran about 1 week ago, he said, addressing to Rouhani, I had told you, don't trust the American. we will leave the deal unless you have very strong guarantee.
In fact, when I was in the States recently, I was sort of following Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, around and listening to what he had to say. And he was already saying, before it was official that the U.S. was pulling out of the JCPOA, the agreement, that Iran wasn't getting what it expected to get out of the agreement, that there was less and less reason for Iran to stay in it. So what Iran is doing right now is saying to the Europeans, give us your best shot, show us what you can do. But Iran knows perfectly well they're not going to be able to deliver. So Iran wants to be seen to have done its due diligence, to have done the things it should do before it starts up nuclear enrichment again.
But when you see,
begins its program.
Christopher, when you see the differences over the Iran deal, but also the trade differences with the United States, are we really entering now into a new phase, the kind of new phase we had after the end of the Cold War?
I'm not sure if I follow that.
No, but I mean, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall that changed the dynamic in Europe. Is this the changing?
No, it's not as big as the fall. Nothing is as big as the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Not yet, yeah.
But this is definitely going to change the dynamic between Western Europe, between the European Union and the United States. And I think Tusk was making the right point. Europe does have to be more independent. Of course, Trump will say, yes, I welcome that. They should take more responsibility. We shouldn't be protecting Europe all the time. They should do more for themselves. But the reason that the United States did that for such a long time was to keep Europe in its orbit. It's now moving out of the American orbit.
And I think this helplessness of Europe, which is being shown by this Iran issue, can help Macron on the long term imposing on Germany more actions in Europe. You know, that we have been, it has been very easy for us to say no to Macron so far. There were any concrete issues involved, just some future European integration. Now it shows we are incapable of doing things. And if Germany now has a very prudent position, it looks already like a country who doesn't do its job, like in the military field. And that is also really badly perceived in Germany.
And he was very blunt about it. The French president was very blunt about it at that summit in Bulgaria, telling the Germans, look, this plus Italy, what's happening there, and we're going to talk about it in a moment, that's all the more reason for us to push ahead with this increased European integration now.
Yeah, and it shows that we have to gain capability.
Are the Germans going to rise to the challenge?
Are
the Germans going to rise to the challenge?
It's not sure. Well, politically, nothing is sure in Berlin right now, but we can talk about it.
Let's talk about it through the prism of Italy. By Monday, we could have an unprecedented populist coalition there, rank and file of the 5 Star movement and the far-right Lega, voting to approve a party platform that includes the deportation of 500,000 migrants, a €780 basic universal income for poor families, the immediate lifting of sanctions on Russia, the scrapping of pension reform, and even though they quit talking about leaving the euro and a €250 billion debt write-off, the far-right's leader, well, he's still crowing.
We've seen the Financial Times have written, Rome opens its gates to the modern barbarians. The barbarians are arriving in Rome. Better to be a barbarian than a slave. Better to be a barbarian than a slave that sells Italy's dignity, future, business, and even its borders.
Rachel Donadio, the barbarians, quote unquote, first of all, are they going to be able to seal this deal? Because in Italy, nothing's sure until it's done.
I don't know if they'll seal the deal by Monday. They've come up with a 58-page government agreement, a platform, which I have read, and it ranges from all the things you mentioned, lifting sanctions with Russia, deporting 500,000 migrants, very right-wing league
Did they leave in the weird stuff about
issues.
vaccines?
They took out the stuff about vaccines. It's a strange combination of kind of local civic-minded, like more bike paths, more elementary school gym teachers, but then very few details on key economic things, like a flat tax, like this universal basic income. It's unclear how Italy can afford that.
So should Europe worry?
Yes, Europe should worry because these guys, the 5 Star movement, which keeps changing its position on a lot of things and has now agreed to ally with the far-right League party, they have a majority to govern. The question is, can they come up with this agreement and come up with a prime minister? But I think it's looking likely. I mean, these are democratically elected politicians, and it's not, I think the idea of a technical government would be very difficult because if you have these parties that won. So yes, Europe should worry because these guys are probably going to govern.
And why should Europe worry?
Well, because they are the most Euro-skeptical government, if they form this government, ever. They're not saying we're going to pull out of the euro, but Beppe Grillo, who's the spiritual father of the 5-Star movement, although he is not able to serve in parliament, he's kind of said, well, maybe we should reconsider, maybe there should be a referendum at some point down the line, so he kind of flirts with that rhetoric. I mean, I don't think Italy will leave the euro, but I don't think that this government, according to its platform, is going to play by the same rules that have always been played by before.
Armin Arefi, this is not Greece. This is the Eurozone's 3rd largest economy we're talking about.
Yes, of course, after the Brexit, then it's a new blow for Europe. And regarding all the statements that have been made by Lega
leader
and 5-Star movement, it's might be very, very difficult regarding the European budgets. But as you said, they were democratically elected, and I would like to take this opportunity to speak about the elections, the next elections in Iran, because we all remember in 2005 there was a guy who was elected, ultra-conservative, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and he was elected by the people during the first term, not the second. And what we risk today in Iran with what happened with Trump leaving the deal is to have a new conservative, real conservative. And that's what governments and presidents, and that's what's being said in Tehran these days. And it's, I'm very worried about that.
If you're joining the show at this point, we've talked about Korea, the Middle East, Italy, proof for that reporter I had on the telephone Thursday from London that yes, there is other news, other than what Emma James is following. It's time for Media Watch.
I'm so glad Emma's.
Emma, there's a wedding taking place.
Is there really?
At Windsor Castle on Saturday.
Yes, just a few people talking about this one. It is quite amazing the amount of coverage it's getting, and also the kind of things that are actually going on in Windsor itself. There's been some rebranding going on, some very clever touches from those people in marketing at Marks and Spencer, for example, because they've actually changed the name, not just in Windsor, but some of their key stores, Markle and Sparkle. Now, you may not know this, not being British, but
no.
Translate, please. Marks and Spencer's is often referred to as Marks and Sparks. I have no idea why. So this obviously was a no-brainer for them to change the name. So that is in Windsor, and apparently the royal party will actually pass that particular store on their route to the wedding on Saturday. So there you go. They will get to see Markle and Sparkle in all of its glory. All sorts of things are going on in store as well. A very clever marketing gimmick, it has to be said. There's even a train station, Windsor and Eton, that has been renamed Harry and Meghan Central. Just a temporary change, obviously, and no one's going to stick to that for forevermore. But what Windsor's also been trying to do is rebrand its homeless problem. It doesn't have a huge problem. They reckon it's 10 to 15 people sleep rough on the streets of Windsor ordinarily. It's a very affluent area. But the council earlier on this year actually wanted to remove them all before the wedding. That was then deemed to be a bit inhumane. So what they've actually done is removed all of their bags and belongings, which doesn't sound very nice, supposedly to stop them having to be checked by security every 5 minutes because they've got all these bags of things. But as we see here, Alexander Seal is a freelance journalist who is in Windsor right now. He says this is showing the situation in Britain, and there is a gentleman asleep under a sleeping bag, and you can see in the background the television reporters carrying on regardless as he tries to catch a few winks and get a few donations in his pot there. This gentleman saying, remember, it's illegal. Well, it's not illegal, a slight exaggeration. It's not really the done thing to sleep on the streets of Windsor if you're homeless, but absolutely fine if you do it wrapped in a flag. Because, of course, the Uber fans, the royal watchers, the big fans are already out there camping out to get the best position they can to catch a glimpse of Meghan and Harry on Saturday.
Yeah, they're not just British, by the way, from France, from around the world.
Absolutely, yes, it is amazing.
Not everyone. it's been told, is a fan of royal weddings.
No, indeed. And lots of people in the UK don't necessarily have a great love of the royal family. This comes from the Private Eye magazine, which is very much kind of a little bit like Charlie Hebdo, but more intelligent, perhaps. And Ken Pine says, for richer or poorer in this cartoon, and you can see they're laughing at the very idea of ever being poorer. Plantu has this one, kings, queens, princes and princesses, and minions. And just look at all the dollar signs and all the money and the TV coverage. Clearly, he's taking a rather negative view of this royal wedding, not seeing the romance in it. This is from Australia, the Daily Telegraph. We've heard an awful lot, especially in the British press, about Meghan Markle's family. Well, they've come up with this front page, various delightful images of the younger members and older members of the royal family. It says, God save the Queen, and then it says, worried about the Markles, meet the Windsors. So lots of people getting their little digs in at the royal family.
OK. Georg, are you a fan of royal weddings? Will you be watching?
You know, I'm really frustrated. You seem to like this romance a little bit here. Where's your revolutionary pride here in France, you know? I mean, you should be sarcastic like Plantu and really give them a bad time there in England, no?
Armin?
Yeah, I will be, of course, watching it tomorrow.
Of course,
of course, yes, because it's an event, and I've been like watching the previous one with Kate and William, and so with a lot of joy, Pipa's dress.
All right. Rachel Donadio?
I'll watch it compared to the other news coming out of Europe, which is pretty depressing and technical and hard to get your head around. Who doesn't want to watch a royal wedding?
Christopher Dickey.
I'm not going to have a choice. My wife's going to be watching it. But I mean, it's a, you know, people project their fantasies onto this. That's what this is all about. I mean, I covered Princess Diana for a while, and it was amazing to see how people in America, you know, secretaries would say, she's just like me. And that's what you get with this, except Meghan Markle is closer to being just like them.
But it's also kind of a big deal. Meghan Markle is a half-black, half-white, divorced commoner, as they say in England. And
an American.
And an American, which is...
Wallace Simpson would turn over in her grave.
A huge
She's spinning right now, I'm sure.
I mean, that he had to abdicate to marry Wallace Simpson. Yeah. But so it shows that the royal family is evolving in some way, or it shows that the culture of celebrity, I mean, she's also an accomplished actress who knows how to cultivate her own image. It's a perfect person to take that role in a way.
Well, and she believes in the same charitable causes.
If you continue like this here, I mean, you're all going to follow Macron and saying it was bad to kill the king. No. You know, it's unbelievable.
Which brings us...
Right.
Speaking of blue bloods and commoners mixing,
yes,
it's Prince Charles that will be walking the bride down the aisle.
Yes, absolutely. It's finally been confirmed. After all the will he won't he about Thomas Markle, Meghan Markle's father, finally confirmed he won't be there, so he won't be there to give away his daughter. So it falls to Prince Charles. Interestingly, though, according to the statement released by Kensington Palace, it was actually Meghan Markle who made the request. And it's interesting that they stipulated that as though they're showing that she's the one who has control over this, because it is a really archaic belief that a woman is given away by a man. Now, she's actually going to begin her procession down the aisle solo, which is interesting. He will then meet her halfway, apparently in some area called the choir of St George's Chapel. And then they will walk together, and then she will do the last few steps to Harry on her own. So it is an interesting one. Some people think it's ridiculous the amount of attention this has received. Have I Got News for You, the comedy show, saying, breaking story, man to walk short distance inside church. Because this has been receiving wall-to-wall coverage, all those board reporters out in Windsor with not much to say other than lots of people are here and there are flags, loving the fact that this was a development today that they could talk about. This woman, though, saying disappointing that it will be Prince Charles to walk Meghan Markle down the aisle instead of her mum. It would have been a brilliant break in tradition, which many people would have been able to relate to. And it is an interesting one. I mean, we don't know whether that was maybe her mother was spared that because of nerves, not wanting to put too much pressure on her on what was already such a huge day for her. And a lot of people talking about, you know, that would have been the feminist thing to do to break with tradition. But it has actually been done before. Queen Victoria took her daughters down the aisle because her husband had died. So it wouldn't actually have been the first time. But I think quite a lot of people wanted to see that happen.
Yeah, but she's being walked down the aisle by the next King of England. That's not a man walking her down the aisle. That's the next King of England.
True. And I think a lot of people see this as their way of showing how much they are welcoming her into the very bosom of the royal family. There has been a lot of negative press, especially about her family. I don't want to sort of go into all of that, but I mean, her half-sister has been doing the rounds. She was referred to as a vulture by one British presenter. When she started talking about media vultures, he said, hang on a minute, you're the biggest vulture out there, because she's written this book, The Diary of Princess Pushy's Sister. So there's an awful lot that has been negative, and I think maybe this was the palace's way of saying, no, look, she's one of ours.
Because that's the thing, right? It's Americans are fascinated by a British wedding, and it's also because it's covered by a British press.
But also, it's the American celebrity website TMZ that keeps breaking these crazy stories about Meghan Markle's father. So the British royal press, there's an entire industry of royal coverers, and they keep getting scooped, and they don't know where the information's coming from. So it's almost this kind of, you know, American tabloidy, gossipy scoops are somehow beating or doing an end run around the traditional British press.
Because, of course, Thomas Markle is accused of trying to manipulate the press by staging some photos that then got sold on. But he's hardly the first to do it. Princess Diana used to do it all the time to try and control what was being said about her in the press. Just one last point to make, because, of course, we have to talk about the dress.
We do.
Feminism be damned.
OK.
Let's talk about the dress.
All right.
Lots of fashion designers still thought to be in the running. There's one name in particular. Everyone seems to think it's going to be Ralph and Russo. But other designers still in the mix, Stella McCartney, Burberry, Victoria Beckham even. There does seem to be a lot of people thinking it will be a British designer. Now, Ralph and Russo are the team behind this dress. Oh, we can't quite see that. That was worn during her official engagement photographs. Quite a sheer, sexy number for such a sombre occasion. So they created that dress. There's another image of it there. They're actually Australian, but they are based in London. So maybe, yes, the bookmakers have them as odds-on favourite to be the designers of the dress.
Because people are betting on this.
Yes, and apparently they've actually suspended bets because Ralph and Russo are thought to be so far ahead of anyone else. I think it makes it more likely it won't be that designer because they don't like to be proved to be too predictable. The Daily Star has a rather ridiculous tweet here saying that she could wear a sheer wedding dress because that's what the designers are famous for. I think that's highly unlikely. Also very unlikely, this suggestion that the gown could be designed by David Emmanuel, one half of the team who came up with Princess Diana's wedding dress. If you remember the 80s monstrosity that it was. In Harper's Bazaar, they describe it as jaw-droppingly dramatic. I think it's just hideous. David Emmanuel is just there to talk to TV, UK coverage. He is not going to be designing the wedding dress. I will put money on it.
All right. Well, we'll be watching the bookmakers and your coverage, of course, and our coverage. I want to thank you, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.